Let's speak to Erol Morkoc. He is a Republican strategist and spokesperson for Republicans Overseas UK. Good morning, Erol. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's good to have you on the program. So what do you think Trump is up to here?
Well, I think if you want to zoom out a little bit, what we see is Trump decoupling South America from Russia, Iran, and China, especially regarding the oil in Venezuela that was going to be what China needed. China needs Iranian and Venezuelan oil free of U.S. sanction if they were to potentially invade Taiwan or do something that would eliminate their access to the traditional oil reserves. So by doing these actions, you see a much broader geopolitical play, much more Monroe Doctrine, much more Roosevelt corollary, much more attention to the hemisphere. And as you mentioned with Noriega and the sort of precedent in that area, the same situation is likely happening today.
So you don't think this is about drugs?
Oh, I think it's about drugs, absolutely. I just think that if you want to, there's two things, right? There's the U.S. empire, if you want to look at it internationally, and there's the domestic U.S. democratic government. So for the domestic people at home, for the situation in the United States, it's all about drugs. For the geopolitical sort of world-shaping gamesmanship part of the empire, it's all about the oil. And those two things are both valid complaints. You have two different groups, two different things. But you see the empire people are the ones who are going to take down the drug traffickers, which is what we believe Nicolas Maduro is, and he'll have to face a court of law about that.
But, well, there's no evidence that, he may well be involved. There's no evidence that he's involved in the fentanyl trade, which is what Trump cares about most, and that all the boats that have been zapped, I think 100 people killed or so in the Caribbean in recent months, that they were actually ferrying fentanyl. It might have been cocaine and marijuana or other things. I don't know. But that's something that will certainly come up in any kind of trial. I just wonder to what extent this is also about domestic politics. And why would he do this? Because Trump has always said that he's not into regime change, and this is precisely what's happening right now.
Yeah, I think it's important to differentiate regime change in the context that we're seeing with I almost said Noriega with Maduro, and regime change as we saw the Bush family try to do, which involved 20 years of American soldiers and lives and millions of people and billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, you can say, actually.
Yeah.
So the concept of regime change and or eliminating surgically somebody from an environment are two different things. Now, nobody in the mega base would support a war with Venezuela. No, none of my friends or fellow voters were. But you would find very few people except absolute idealists who would have a problem with removing Nicolas Maduro in the sense that they did today. So that's a domestic take on it. It's not as though people are supporting regime change as much as they're supporting efficient regime change, we could say.
Okay. There's an argument that he hoped that would happen, in recent weeks, because as he built up the pressure with naval forces off the coast of Venezuela, those naval strikes, those airstrikes on Venezuelan boats, opposition inside, of course, the phone call that he placed to Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. He congratulated her the day that she did, and maybe she will be involved in some kind of plan. But he sort of seems to have edged closer and closer to actually sending the troops in. I wonder whether you know what changed his mind and, what made him go for the final trigger, as it were.
Well, I think it's very Trumpian, where he's got the right hand warming up and he's making it look like he's going to come down with a hammer fist, and the left hand he just comes and takes very tactically what he wants. He's a master of negotiation, despite the fact that people might dislike that broad statement. He really is, and part of negotiation involves winning. And in this kind of a world, you can win very thoroughly. So when you give Donald Trump the option for one more card on the table, which is military options, he never had that in the business world where he could just do that. You give a guy who's very good at negotiating that one more sort of point in game theory. I think it's a very hard guy to go up against. He can smile, he can say what he wants, he can put his warnings out, but in the end, you never know what's going to happen. And because you don't know what's going to happen, it's better to work with him. And Maduro found out the hard way, and maybe the next guy will be much more quick to come back to the table.
But is it a win for Donald Trump, or indeed for anyone, if Venezuela now descends into something even worse than it's been in for the last few years and decades, which is total chaos and even some kind of bubbling, frothing civil war?
No, that would obviously be worse. But as you see, there's almost no defenses. It was almost like we were taking on a Berber tribe. There's nobody to stop the U.S. helicopters from flying around Caracas. And, Venezuela is a very competent country. They used to be one of the wealthiest countries in the hemisphere. On top of it, the last 20 years has been disastrous for them, whether it be economically, their money is effectively toilet paper, or even health-wise. I mean, people are losing 15, 20 pounds a year, which maybe in the West we could use that. But over there, that was becoming very unhealthy for them. So I really don't think that things could get worse. They were eating, zoo animals at one point. So I think with the great U.S. support with Marco Rubio, who's a Spanish-speaking person, somebody we can maybe use to negotiate better, I don't think that things have to go worse for them. I think things go a lot better for them, and I think that we're going to lead that way.
But one would certainly hope so, although that does leave the question of, breaking international law or not. You mentioned Marco Rubio there. I know from my own sources in Washington that for him this has been an incredibly important issue. He's been driving this very much on the regime change front more than the president himself, I gather, or other people around him. And he, of course, is a Cuban American. We know that Cuba has very strong links with Venezuela. Venezuela provides the oil. Cuba provides the doctors, a lot of political support, some military support for the Maduro regime that is now no longer. To what extent, and he started off making that interesting point about hemispheric decoupling, to what extent, if this ultimately is about Cuba, could things get really complicated?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there for Marco Rubio. His stated goal basically is to decouple Venezuela from Cuba, which will then give Cuba nothing to stand on. And the final piece of his, I think, personal vendetta here is to eventually bring down the communist government of Cuba that did his family so much disservice over the last few decades, as according to Secretary of State Rubio. So I think that once the dominoes start falling, I don't think it's going to be a big problem as much as you might see a quiet revolution in Cuba down the line. Now that Cuba doesn't have any big backers, and certainly China's not trying to come and stir that up further as they have their own issues. I think Cuba's actually probably next on Rubio's list if he's actually going through and knocking off the enemies of the United States.
Erol Morkoc, Republican strategist, spokesperson for Republicans overseas. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. And it should be said, the Kremlin has issued a statement saying they're concerned by what has happened overnight in Caracas, but they haven't exactly condemned it.